The discourse around difficulty in video games has always circled the same question: who gets to enjoy what? Take for example one of 2025's most acclaimed releases. With years of anticipation built by its predecessor, it has somehow managed to meet impossible levels of hype, at least if Metacritic is to be believed. And with such universal acclaim, you might expect universal accessibility, but once again the conversation has turned to whether parts of its design are simply a bad fit for the audience it's meant to reach. Of course, a certain degree of difficulty makes sense given the setting. The game takes place in a vast underground world filled with fearsome beasts, strange denizens, and towering bosses. The protagonist, a little girl in a red dress, seems powerless by design, though she has a few clever tricks despite a lack of sleeves. It's action-adventure in the classic sense. You build up experience both by learning this new world, its threats and opportunities, and of course in the cool video game way of unlocking new abilities and more means to protect yourself. But sometimes experience and upgrades can't smooth over the cracks in what should be finely tuned difficulty, especially in games borrowing from classic platformers where precision-engineered obstacle courses are the norm. Here the disconnect creeps in, what the developers expect you to pull off versus what you can actually achieve. And the result is frustration. While you may admire the technical feats and visual splendor, struggling to engage with the game part of the video game quickly sours the experience, especially when you're told the difficulty was designed to provoke a particular feeling that simply doesn't land. But enough dancing around it. The game I'm talking about is, of course, Donkey Kong Bonanza. Oh, did you think I was talking about Silksong? I guess I can see the confusion, especially with me using the wrong footage here and all. I mean, both were highly anticipated, both take place in sprawling underground worlds, both feature a girl in a red dress surrounded by fearsome creatures, you play as one, after all, and both have received near universal acclaim while sparking some debates about difficulty. But unlike a certain buggy game accused of being too punishing, Bonanza stumbles the other way. Not enough difficulty. And while Silksong's challenge has been endlessly dissected, Bonanza's softness barely gets mentioned in mainstream discourse. Maybe because too easy sounds less like a problem and more like a perk, like having too much cake. And so the only ones making noise are culture war pundits, using Bonanza as ammo to moan about games catering to wider audiences. Don't worry, this video is going to be the good version of that. There's a value in putting easy games under the lens, then. Difficulty isn't one size fits all, but when two acclaimed action-adventure games land on opposite extremes, perhaps there's something to learn. Asking what Bonanza was aiming for and how it's like a challenge undercuts that intent can be a useful design exercise, one that might help future games avoid the same pitfalls and, more importantly, open the door for more players to enjoy them. Developers often make games challenging to create a sense of accomplishment, rewarding perseverance and giving you the satisfaction of felling a giant. This dynamic fits naturally within action-adventure games where players are cast as underdogs confronting forces far greater than themselves. The challenge encourages exploration, observation and learning, before finally daring to take a risk that opens the path forward. Along the way, new abilities or insights reshape your relationship with the world. Returning to earlier areas, you breeze past obstacles that once seemed insurmountable, carving open new paths and reinforcing the feeling that you've truly mastered the environment. Donkey Kong Bonanza, however, takes the opposite approach, casting DK instead as a kind of under-god. He feels less like the struggling hero at the start of an adventure and more like the overpowered character you'd expect to control after a 110% completion run. From the very beginning, it grants overwhelming power almost out the gate. The world bends beneath Donkey Kong's fists and little offers meaningful resistance. This is its central technical achievement, a fully voxel-based world that players can reduce to a skeletal husk if they choose. With that is a clear intent. Players are encouraged to think beyond traditional platforming solutions. Why run a gauntlet of obstacles when you can punch a hole through the wall? Why climb a treacherous tower when you can stack dirt into a makeshift ladder and bypass it entirely? At first, this creative freedom is compelling. It feels mischievous, as if you're outsmarting the designers by breaking their world apart. But with nothing substantial to slow you down, the thrill fades. Even the fiercest bosses struggle to hold the line, their health bar shredded in moments by relentless smashing. Super strength erodes tension, and the game's collectathon structure nudges play from curiosity to compulsion, pushing you into the rhythm of completing content simply for its own sake. The emphasis on emergent, player-driven problem-solving echoes a design philosophy Nintendo has explored since Breath of the Wild. They're a rich interplayer systems, some controlled directly by the player, others unfolding naturally in the environment, offered multiple solutions to both small objectives and larger challenges. But here it's layered onto the framework of a game closer to Super Mario Odyssey, an open-world platformer that even at release faced criticism for its forgiving difficulty. In Odyssey, progression was tied to a flood of trinkets, many earned through trivial tasks like kicking a rock or stumbling across a nut. As a result, players could reach the credits without much of the experience sticking, aside from a handful of set pieces or bonus challenges that offered real difficulty. Bonanza pushes this even further. It's a world that is overflowing with Bonandium gems, but none are required to finish the game. Instead, they feed into an upgrade system that makes Donkey Kong stronger, tougher, and even more efficient at finding yet more gems. The expectation is clear: you should collect as much as possible to prepare for later trials. Yet because the game can be completed without touching these upgrades, the developers have had to make these challenges universally approachable, and so they never meaningfully scale. The result is one of the rare adventure games that actually becomes easier the longer you play. The best games encourage players to draw on every system or tool at their disposal to solve problems, and usually that encouragement isn't a carrot but a stick, or in Silksong's case, a needle. It's ironic then that the Donkey Kong franchise, at least outside of Nintendo's direct involvement, has been long defined by challenge. Rare's Country Games and Retro's Return series, both 2D side-scrollers, demanded sharp reflexes to respond to incoming threats and tightly spaced obstacles. Mechanics like rolls and barrel throws had to be mastered as a direct response to a finely tuned menace. Bonanza, by contrast, is shaped by its open-world structure, and that scope makes it harder to pace difficulty in the same way. In Silksong, players struggling with one path can often explore elsewhere, finding less demanding content to build confidence before circling back. In Bonanza, there's no equivalent outlet. Even its handful of isolated challenge rooms, tucked away from the main world, fail to offer much for players seeking a sterner test. Or at least, not until after the credits. There, the game introduces new content alongside a £20 roguelike expansion, both aimed squarely at expert players eager to push Bonanza's mechanics to their limit. These additions finally inject genuine threat and opportunity into the mix. Yet, while welcome, price aside, they feel cordoned off at the margins of the experience, when their difficulty might have been better woven throughout the game itself. The real pity is that because of its low baseline difficulty, many of Bonanza's most interesting systems feel underutilized. DK's wardrobe, the new material types, even Bonanza's transformations rarely matter. My personal favourite is the rest system, where players can spend money to convert parts of a level into safe havens where DK can heal and even grant himself extra temporary hearts. The more of these spaces you establish, the more hearts you can carry. The idea is clear: transform hostile environments into a kind of home, much like Odyssey's roaming caravan. Yet with little in the game that demands the extra resilience and no real punishment for failure beyond losing some cash, the system becomes cosmetic roleplay in a game that otherwise optimizes such features out. It's as useful, ultimately, as a motel hundreds of miles from the highway. As my YouTube friend and Sharper Games writer Lam Hoot once argued in his video on Super Mario Odyssey, depth of systems doesn't mean much if you're rarely motivated to use them. And while I disagreed at the time, part of the joy of Odyssey for me was chaining together trinkets with its slick moveset, in Bonanza the point finally hit home. With most of its gameplay verbs collapsed into punching, the illusion slips, and suddenly it feels like Emperor Miyamoto has no clothes. A common refrain with difficult games is that if you don't gel with them, maybe they're just not for you. I dislike that line of criticism. It's patronising and, more importantly, completely useless. It frames certain titles as games for gamers, rarefied works that only the deeply invested can appreciate, provided they know the tropes and have the hand-eye coordination. Yet games, by design, are flexible. The experience shifts with whoever is playing, and many even include ways to tweak their systems to fit the player, what we usually call difficulty modes. These are demanded constantly of punishing titles like Dark Souls or Silksong, and yet curiously, the same conversation rarely surfaces when a game is too easy. Nintendo has traditionally avoided difficulty menus, instead letting challenge emerge from player choice. Super Mario Bros. Encouraged speedrunning or chasing high scores to season in difficulty. New Super Mario Bros. Could be beaten without ever pressing the run button, but its star medals demanded deeper engagement with the game's systems to grab. Donkey Kong Bonanza tries something similar, but the result is awkward. As mentioned, you don't need to collect a single Banandium gem to beat the game, which means you can skip upgrading Donkey Kong altogether, running with his base health, strength and abilities, and relying only on temporary Bonanza forms or environmental tricks. Yet gems are positioned as the reward for engaging with content, so the game essentially asks players to complete tasks while ignoring the payoff. If these gems had instead tied into another form of progression, or if upgrades had been pared back entirely, the system might have felt more satisfying. Imagine if gems could even be spent to reshape the game world itself, upgrading enemy difficulty or altering the terrain. But asking players to voluntarily make a game harder through these kind of levers is nearly impossible to sustain. It's a psychological gap the design never quite bridges. It's a real shame because the purpose of challenge is to create friction, enough to make you linger in a game and absorb it more deeply. Think of how many lore channels exist for Dark Souls, catering to players eager to unravel every detail of its world, or the enormous hype that continues to surround Silksong. Part of that comes from their unapproachable quality, the sense of being works you have to wrestle with and experiences people can take pride in understanding. When a game lacks that friction, it becomes harder to hold on to. Donkey Kong Bonanza, on a production level, fully deserves its accolades. I haven't touched on its story, visuals or sound here. This isn't the video for that, and you can find plenty of praise for those elements elsewhere, but I can't help worrying that with time, much of what it does so well will fade from memory. In a year dominated by polished iterations of familiar formulas, Bonanza stands out as something genuinely different. The aim wasn't to offer the satisfaction of pain followed by relief, but a breezy, chaotic experience, more in line with junky classics like Hulk Ultimate Destruction, Red Faction or Saints Row. I've often joked that it's the perfect outlet for kids with too much energy, and maybe they're the ones who will truly connect with it. But it's a fascinating case study not because it fails outright, but because it illustrates the other side of the difficulty spectrum, where not only lowering the skill floor, but raising the skill ceiling would be welcome. The post-game content and roguelike expansion show that Bonanza has plenty of untapped potential, and perhaps the next time Nintendo brings back Donkey Kong and his destructible world, they'll place a few more obstacles in the way so that players can savour the satisfaction, like biting into a perfectly ripe Bonandium gem. Let me know in the comments what you thought about Bonanza, Silksong, or difficulty in games more broadly. I'm James, and I'll see you all in the next upload.